Okay, welcome everybody officially to Curious Vlad. It's 8 o'clock and we're about ready to start. And let's begin as we always do with a prayer. O Heavenly King, Comforter, Spirit of Truth, who art everywhere present and fillest all things, treasury of good things and giver of life, come and dwell in us and cleanse us of all impurity and save our souls, O good one. So I'd like to remind those who are watching this after it's recorded that you can leave a question by commenting on the video below the video. So that at the next week, we'll answer your question that you've asked. Okay, more folks coming in. 1 second. Right. So those of you who are already on when I started recording, well, you're here, but when somebody comes in, they have to answer a couple of questions when there is recording already going on. So let me pull up a couple of notes that I have. Okay, so yesterday was a really great and very full and exciting Sunday. The gospel was Luke 8, 5 to 15, and that's the gospel of the parable of the sower of the seed. So everybody kind of knows that one. I think that it's a good one, but if you haven't read it recently, make sure that you do that. I mean, I highly recommend it. I'm putting it in the chat right now. 8, 5 to 15. Have a look at that because it is really a very good one. And remember that you get to decide what kind of soil you are. That's the whole point of the thing. Is not that anything is random in the church. It's not. There's no such thing as random. There's no such thing as chance. The Lord gives us to be the sort of seed that we can make ourselves. And it even says in the gospel how to do that. So have a look at that and think about that and pray about that. Yesterday we had our young adult group dinner. It was a great dinner, great conversation. We had a couple of guests who talked to us about the festival and how the young people can get more involved, and also about the upcoming ball that we'll have on March 1st. So you heard it here first. You can sort of mark that on your calendar. That's the Fast Free Friday after the Sunday of the Publican and the Pharisee. We'll be having our ball then instead of right after Nativity. It just became too busy at that time of year. Too many services, too many things going on. So we moved it to the Fast Free Friday after Publican and Pharisee. And that obviously moves around each year, but this year it'll be on March 1st. So we talked to the young people about what it means to be Orthodox and pro-life and how those things go together. We could talk about that here if you all want to. It was a really interesting and I think pretty exciting conversation. It was very noisy and lots of questions and lots of conversation. It was really great. We had one of our parish Zoe for Life representatives there. Courtney was there, and it was a really good conversation. So it was a lot of fun. So anyway, we had that on last night. We're still kind of recovering. It was really great. And then I just want to remind people that the catechism class that we have on Friday evenings, every Friday evening, we have Vespers at 6 and then catechism right after. You can join us at church or you can join us here too. And everybody's welcome. So please join in, whether you're inquiring, whether you're a catechumen, whether you've been Orthodox for 50 years, you're welcome to join us. And then the final thing I want to mention is this Sunday we have an interesting service at St. Vladimir's. Instead of the Liturgy of St. John Chrysostom, we will be serving the Liturgy of St. James, the Brother of the Lord, which is served only once per year. So, and thank God, the bishop allows us to do that here at St. Vladimir's, and we've been doing that probably for about 5 years. And so we'll be able to do that this Sunday. Usually it's a weekday, right? So we get to do it on Sunday. So please join us if you can. It's super. Right now, our live stream, it was down this weekend. We had a power surge that zapped our the thing that we use to broadcast, but it should be up today, hypothetically. So already on Wednesday morning, you should be able to follow us again. Friday catechism at this link, and I just put that in the chat, so you'll see it there. You can find that on our website too. It's a kind of a random link. It's just Google makes that. So anyway, but that's on our website, and I think the link goes up on Thursday morning, every Thursday morning at 6 a.m. Anyway, it's there. So if you have a look at our website, which is stva2.org, you can find it there. And that's the same week to week. That never changes, just like this one never changes. So Alexandra and I are having kind of a side conversation, guys, just so that she can get the information for the Friday class. Okay, so we did have a couple of questions that came in, which is nice. I really appreciate it when people send the questions ahead of time. This one especially, it was good because I got a chance to read a little bit from the fathers to be able to answer it a little bit more comprehensively. So I'm pulling out this book. Let's see if it'll show up in your. It doesn't, because of the screen that I have. Anyway, I'm reading from. I'll be reading from the explanation of the gospel from the Blessed Theophylact. Okay, so the point, the question is about Matthew chapter 27, verse 52. This is where after Christ is crucified, the bodies of the saints, the graves were opened, and many bodies of the saints which slept arose and came out of the graves after his resurrection and went into the holy city and appeared unto many. So the question is, why did this happen? Also, were people not buried in caskets back then? They weren't. That's a more modern kind of thing. And the Jews still to this day just wrap people in blankets. So no, people were not. They were just wrapped in that winding sheet like Christ was wrapped in by Joseph of Arimathea and put into Joseph's tomb. So here's what Blessed Theophylact says, and he very closely follows St. John Chrysostom, by the way. Understand the raising of the dead which occurred at the Lord's crucifixion also revealed the freeing of the souls in Hades. Those who arose at that time were seen by many, lest the event appeared to have been only an apparition. They arose as a sign from God. Now, some may ask, well, why did it happen immediately? Because he descended into Hades and he freed the people, and then he rose from the dead himself on the Sunday, of course. That's why we celebrate the resurrection on Sunday. Let me read a little bit from Hilary of Poitiers, who's a Western saint that did a lot of commentary on the gospel and is a totally Orthodox saint. He says, dispelling the shadows of death and illuminating the darkness of hell, Christ destroyed the spoils of death itself at the resurrection of the saints who saw him immediately. And I think he gives a hint here. Why did this happen immediately? We live in time. And because we live in time, we are used to everything happening one thing after another. I snapped my finger, therefore the sound came forth. But remember, in the heavenly kingdom, there's no time, right? God is. There is no was or will be with God. So the fact that they rose instantly when he was crucified, and that happened before he rose from the dead, that's not a big issue for us as Orthodox Christians, because we understand that there's no time in the next life. So these people were living in the next life. So the fact that happened instantaneously, that was for us. That was for the people living in Jerusalem and around there, the soldiers who were at his tomb, at the crucifixion, and so on and so forth. So it was for them that it happened right away. But for God, it doesn't matter, because for God, everything is. There is no was or will be with God. So the fact that it happened instantaneously, that's not an issue from the divine side, and that was done specifically so that those people who were present at the crucifixion would understand the gravity of what they had just seen. If the fact that the earth quaked and the rocks broke and the temple, the veil of the temple ripped in half, if that wasn't enough for them, then God in his mercy allowed them to see people who had risen from the dead. So there's a follow-up question to that. Do we know from tradition who those saints are and what happened to them? What did they do afterwards? We don't. And in fact, Blessed Theophylact even talks about this. Some say that they lived, some say that they died after this. So if he is such an expert on the gospel as saying we really don't know, then the answer is we really don't know. So, and sometimes that's the answer for an Orthodox Christian, and that's okay. We're okay with a little bit of mystery. We don't have to know every single thing. Knowing everything actually doesn't strengthen your faith. After a while, it starts to wear on it, in fact. So that's the answer to those two questions. And those were the only two that came in. So as you know, those of you who participate in the show regularly, I can just talk about everything and nothing ad nauseum, but that's not really fun. for everybody. So if someone has a question, I'd be very happy to have it. And usually when one person asks, then that motivates everybody else, and things get flowing, and everything is very, very nice. So if you have a question, I think somebody put something in the chat. 1 second here. I'm just going to take a little drink of water, and we will get to that. Okay, the question is, oh boy, I forgot. Kind of small type. In your last catechism class, you mentioned something about joining Orthodoxy via baptism versus joining by chrismation. Can you talk about that some and why it is done? Okay, Saint Basil the Great, who's one of the most important fathers of the church and a great theologian, wrote a really long treatise about how people are joined to the church. In our days, we just think about, well, people come to church and they're baptized, and that's that. That's one of the ways that people come to the church. That's kind of the standard in our days, because a lot of what Saint Basil wrote is based on the assumption that people are going to kind of do what they say their faith is. For instance, in some Protestant churches, they claim to be worshippers of the Holy Trinity, and that they baptize people by triune in the name of the Trinity, 3 times in the name of the Trinity. But really, they might baptize people in the name of the moon and the sun and the rain. We really don't know, because there's not really much control of those things anymore. So because of that, baptism became the default. It's just kind of what we do for everybody. But it is true that people could come into the church in different ways. In our days, probably practically speaking, the only ways that happens is by baptism or by chrismation. And when chrismation is with the renunciation of your former faith and your acceptance of Orthodox Christianity. If you've never read that renunciation of the former faith and the acceptance of Orthodox Christianity, it's very powerful. I remember when my wife was there the first time for that, and she said, I've only been at baptisms, and this is a person who's in church a lot, okay, and was in Jordanville with us for we were there for 4 years. We were married the whole time we were in seminary. And I think it was maybe like 10, 15 years ago, she was at chrismation for the first time, and she said, wow, that is so powerful when that person essentially says, I'm not what I was, and I am an Orthodox Christian. And when we baptize someone, that's not done. It's not good, it's not bad, it's just that's not done. But when someone's chrismated, that is done. And so that's done at the back of the church, and then they're brought into the middle of the church. Essentially, they are confessed of their sins, and then they're chrismated with the special chrism, which is also used at baptisms. That can be done, could be done, if someone was a Roman Catholic, a Lutheran, an Episcopalian, Armenian or other Monophysite, or Reformed. So that could happen, but most people want to get baptized, so it doesn't happen that often. But occasionally somebody will St. Paul says one baptism, and I feel like that, I had that baptism, and I want to be an Orthodox Christian, but this is a big temptation for me. In that case, then I talk to the bishop, and he makes the decision about that. The default is baptism. The bishop can exercise economy, however, but he has to be the one who does that. So I talk to him, and he makes that call. Usually, he'll follow my recommendation, and he does that, I think, for all his priests. If the priest recommends, we think Flidiga, or I think that this would be better if he was chrismated, then generally he blesses that. So I hope that answers that question. It just depends. It depends on where you're coming from, on how you come into the church. If you're coming from another Trinitarian church, there's a possibility you could be chrismated, but as a rule, we baptize people. So hope that helps. Okay, so last time we used the class chat kind of exclusively for questions, and that's fine, but people are welcome to raise their hand or just unmute their microphone and ask questions that way as well. So if anyone has a question, now is the time to ask. Oh, okay, I see Alexandra, you raised your hand.
Good evening. I have a question about, I'm Serbian Orthodox, and we have a monastery up in Athos. And I was wondering about the religion the differences in the religion with I don't know how it's pronounced in English, but Zilot, Zilot.
That one I don't know. You mean it's another monastery on Mount Athos?
Yes, yes. Apparently, these monks, they live in caves. They're very secluded from.
Zealots. Yeah, in
Yeah.
English we'd call them zealots. Uh-huh. Yeah. So first of all, for those who don't know, each local Orthodox church has a monastery on Mount Athos. There are 20 major monasteries. Alexandra is talking about Hillendar, which is a very famous monastery, and one of the very big ones. And it's generally a Serbian monastery. They accept others there, of course, but it's mostly Serbs there. The Russian one is St. Panteleimon. The Romanian one, I forgot anyway, but each of the major Orthodox groups has a monastery there. I don't know how many people are at St. Panteleimon now. Before the revolution, there were about 2,000 monks just in that monastery alone. It's nowhere near that now, but that was actually right at the turn of from the 19th to the 20th century. So the question is the relationship with the zealots. These are not necessarily people who have more zeal. These are just people who live in a more, how can I say it, in a more sparse way, perhaps, than in the big monasteries. Because in the big monasteries, it's like a small town. There's everything is kind of there for you. Whereas if you live in a skeet, which is a few monks living together, or you live as a hermit, and there are hermits there, like who live in caves and so on and so forth. They are generally called zealots, and the faith is the same. Everyone on Mount Athos is an Orthodox Christian. Now, there are sometimes disagreements between monasteries, and they sort of don't really interact very much when they're having such a dispute. I think there is one monastery right now which is kind of causing some issues. I forget which one it is, but essentially everyone is in communion there, and they all, interestingly, there is a in Cares, which is the capital of Mount Athos, there is a cathedral there, and all of the heads of the monasteries meet regularly there, and there is a seat there for the abbot, but no one ever sits in that seat because that seat is reserved for the Mother of God, because that Mount Athos was given to her as her dominion, and that seat remains always empty, except if she decides to occupy it herself when all of the abbots meet. So I always find that very, very beautiful. My spiritual father that I have had since I was a student in Jordanville was 7 years in Mount Athos as a monk in one of the skeets, which was a dependency of Hillendar. Actually, that's where they got their food, was from Hillendar. And after 7 years, his elder, the person who was the priest and the head of the little skeet, got very sick, and so they had to scatter, and he ended up back in Jordanville, and now he's the bishop in Australia. Actually, it's Bishop George. So I got to hear a lot of very interesting stories about Mount Athos, and actually one of our parishioners is on a pilgrimage to Greece now. I don't know if part of the pilgrimage went to Mount Athos or not. She is a woman, so she can't go there. That's Mount Athos is only open to men, but it'll be interesting to hear her stories when she comes back. So, okay, so that was probably way more information than you wanted, but I hope that it was at least somewhat helpful.
Thank you. I appreciate it, Father.
You're welcome. Okay, friends, other questions? Let's jump right in there. And I know that people have really good questions, but they mostly keep them in their heads. So that makes it harder for everybody else to be edified by that. Okay, Euphemia raised her hand just right before Alexandra, so we'll let her ask first, and then Alexandra. Go ahead, Euphemia.
I have a question about the royal doors. So I've noticed that whenever the bishop is performing the liturgy, that the doors are open most of the time or all the time, probably most of the time, but like at certain parts that normally you see them closed during the a service where a priest performs the liturgy. So I'm just wondering why that is.
Yeah, so that's a very good question. The royal doors in the Russian tradition, this is going to vary from local church to local church, but in the Russian tradition, during the liturgy we're talking about now, the royal doors are opened only at certain times when a priest is serving. When a bishop is serving, they are always open. I think this is because the bishop is the successor of the apostles, and it's kind of the highest, most triumphant expression of the divine liturgy, that hierarchical liturgy. In Russia, I have seen parishes, specific parishes, which are designated as missionary centers, have the a blessing for the doors to be open, just as if a bishop would serve, even when a priest is serving. But that's an exception. That's not normal. Um, as far as priests go, in the Russian tradition, when a priest is made a mitred archpriest, which is after 40 years, he's eligible after 40 years. It's not a reward for 40 years, but at that point, such a thing could be considered. If a priest is given that award, then he's allowed to serve with the royal doors open until the creed. And if a priest is made a proto-presbyter, and there were only 2 of those in pre-revolutionary Russia, so it's a pretty rare thing, then the priest could serve with the royal doors open until the creed. Until Our Father. Sorry, the first one is till the creed. The second one is to Our Father. Nowadays in Russia, those are separate awards. Like whether a priest has a right to serve with the royal doors open until the creed, and whether he has a mitre, those are different awards. But before the revolution, those were always connected, and so in the church abroad, they're always connected. But whenever a bishop serves, then the royal doors are always open, because it's almost like a little Pascha in a way, because this is the visit of the apostle to the church, and it's such a significant thing that with the bishop, the royal doors are always open. So I hope that answered your question. If not, please feel free to ask a follow-up.
Yes, that's helpful. Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. Hold on, somebody's trying to get in. Let me let them in. Let's try. Okay, Alexandra, you had another question?
Hi, yes, I do. I was going to ask, so again, pertaining to the differences between the Orthodox faiths, in the Greek church, I noticed that they kneel. I don't know if they do the same. I would assume the Russians don't do the same, that they just have an empty church. The only time we kneel is on the 7th of May when we make those, the wreaths out of wheat. So in those circumstances, do you know of any other faiths that like the different set of
this is a good question. So the different practices that
Yeah.
have grown up in American Orthodoxy, essentially, because if you go to Greece, nobody is kneeling on Sunday.
Yeah.
This happened in America, and it's not just the Greeks. There are you can find this in other local Orthodox churches as well. When some folks came to America, they essentially looked around and said, okay, what does it mean to worship in America? And so that's how pews came into the church in some of the churches, as opposed to just having the church open without any pews. And some folks noticed that, okay, well, in the Americans are, they're kneeling on Sunday too. We didn't do that back where we came from, but that must be what you do here. They have organs in American churches, so maybe we should have an organ. So this is essentially how it happened, and I'm not mocking anybody. I'm just saying this is the sort of anthropological process that happened. And I mean, I get it. On one hand, I totally get it. People wanted to become a part of the American life here, and I think that's even laudable. But at the same time, we have to be careful not to throw the baby out with the bathwater. So I think that it varies in different churches, but although it's true that the Russians were kind of here first in Alaska and so on and so forth, after the Russian Revolution, when everything just kind of fell apart and went to pot, the Greeks started to get their act together first here, and that's about the time when those things happen, and so that had an influence on the rest of the Orthodox in America. But you really don't see that very often, I think, except in some churches. You'll see it, like it's pretty common in Greek churches. You can find it in some OCA churches. Occasionally, you find even pews in Serbian churches, but I never saw anybody kneeling in the Serbian church on a Sunday. So I guess these aren't dogmatic questions, right? So there's a question between. There are different kind of issues in Orthodox Christianity. We have traditions, small t traditions, big T traditions, which are often very dogmatic, and then we have dogmas, like Jesus Christ is the Son of God, Jesus Christ is born of a virgin, God is the Holy Trinity. These are not things which are up for debate. These are not things which we can be changed, but like, do you sit on Sunday or you stand on Sunday? There's a more traditional and a less traditional way, but it's not a dogmatic question. So it's not like somebody puts themselves outside of the church if they kneel on Sunday. Although that one is actually, if you read the canon, it's pretty strict actually, because Sunday is the day of the resurrection. Sunday is about being the adopted children of God. So strictly speaking, there's really no kneeling on Sundays because it's the day of the resurrection. But on all other days, there is prostrations. That's kind of like either you're prostrate or you're standing. Those are our two normal positions before God in church. And essentially 6 days of the week, we would be prostrate at certain parts of the service. But because we mostly go to church on Sunday, that seems weird to us, although that is the more regular practice. We have a little cheat sheet that we put together, and I will put the link up. It'll just take a second, and hopefully they have enough bandwidth to not cause a major problem here. Or, well, let me see if I can do it real quick. Prostrations.
So, Father, if I'm at the Greek church and they're kneeling, do I kneel with them, or do I be an outlier and not kneel?
Yeah, I don't know. Like I find that standing in a pew hurts my back. Like I just don't like to. So before I was ordained, like when I would just be this dude coming to church, I just didn't like to stand there because it hurt my back. So I would usually like step out and kind of go to the back, not because I thought I was better, but because it was hurting my back. So that's what I still do usually. Although now, if I'm a priest, I usually will hide in the altar and not do that. But I think it just depends on the context. Like if you go with a friend who's Greek and you're with her in the pew and she does that, I would, because I think that it's kind of like, how can I say it? Sometimes it's better to bend the rule a little bit than to hurt somebody and sin more by hurting them. So yeah, I think that's what you have to decide is, does that make sense? Where is that line? And I think as Orthodox Christians, we usually err on the side of love. I just put the link into the chat about the standard practice in the Russian church, which when I've been in Serbia, I noticed it's exactly the same. So I think that's pretty standard for the Orthodox Church. But in America, you'll find differences because of the pews. Like everybody can't prostrate if there's pews all over the place. It just doesn't work. Like I'm not sure how that works on like Holy Friday or Holy Saturday. But anyway, I'm not judging. I'm just saying I don't get the logistics of it. But I put into our chat just now what we've put together at St. Vladimir's to help people understand when they come to church during the week what they should expect.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay. I don't see any other hands up, so I will encourage people, please ask your questions. Okay. Can you tell me about your 5 o'clock Halloween alternative? Okay. So I just heard an interesting podcast last night. We had the teens over, or not teens, but the young adults over. But I often have trouble, especially after that, like winding down. It takes me a little while to kind of wind down and get ready for bed. So I was listening to a podcast. It was an interview of someone who had been a psychic for a long time, but who had found God and become a Christian. And she talked about, the different demonic things that are going on in the New Age movement. And I mean, it wasn't that was not new to me, but what I thought was interesting was just her sort of unsolicited thought about Halloween. She's like, I can't do Halloween. I was working with demons for 30 years and I just can't do Halloween. Like, that's interesting. I mean, I think Halloween can be very, it can be very, it could be very innocent and so on and so forth. Like, everybody likes candy. I like candy. You can give me candy anytime. But Halloween has become really dark in our days, and interesting that this person who is so familiar with demons wants nothing to do with it. And I think a lot of it has become very demonic. And so we offer an alternative for families on that day. The reason that we do it at 5 o'clock, usually we have church at 6 on the weekdays, but we do it at 5 because that's when trick-or-treating is happening. So we think it's easier for parents if like kids are just physically removed from that and they're at church. And so November 1st happens to be the feast day of Saint John of Kronstadt, who's a very important saint in the Russian Orthodox Church, and that's also the day when the new martyrs and confessors of Russia were glorified as saints. So it's a really big day in the Russian Orthodox Church, and so for us, we want to have services anyway. So what we've done is we just moved our Vesper service to 5, and then afterwards we have fun things for the kids to do. We like do some folk dancing and play some games like physical games, and then afterwards, usually we'll have dinner for the kids, and we'll watch like a decent movie. Last year we watched the first half of The Sound of Music. It's so long, like you can't watch the whole thing. It's like 4 hours. So this year we watched the second half. We'll watch the second half tomorrow. And yeah, and we've been doing that, I think, pretty much since I got here in '97. Maybe it was a year or two before we did that. You know, you can argue ad nauseum about the trick or treat, and is that like a thing that the dead have come back and they're hungry because that's what the pagans thought, and like there's some legitimacy to that, I think, but I don't think it's worth hanging our hat on it or like arguing about it, because people will be like, no, historically this, historically that. Okay, fine, the psychic said she won't do anything with Halloween because she knows where the demons are. That's enough for me. So and if you just look at like what happens on Halloween, it's a lot of bad stuff. So we like to give people the alternative. We're not going to tell parents what to do, but we're going to give them an alternative, and we usually have a real nice turnout, and it's a really fun thing. So it's mostly a kid-based activity, but of course adults are welcome to come to the service, which is at 5 o'clock, and yeah, it's a very pleasant time. So that's why we do it, and that's essentially been our practice, like I said, for almost like 25 years probably. So I hope that helps. I hope that was a good answer. Other questions, friends? I saw that Nadia joined us briefly, but now I see that the screen is blank. So maybe she can come back. And maybe is Constantine with us, Grisha, or are you alone?
I'm alone right now. He's asleep.
Ah, he's asleep. Okay,
Bedtime's
that's
at
legit.
7:30.
That's well, that's legit. Okay. Other questions, friends, that you would like to ask, you can put them in the chat or you can raise your hand. And either way, we will talk about them. Some folks, wow. I just got a text from our diocesan treasurer. I think probably most people, everybody maybe on the call, knows that our priest in Traverse City, his wife got in a really bad accident with a couple of their kids a couple of weeks ago today. I think it's 3 weeks now, I don't remember. But on Friday or Saturday, we advertised an opportunity for people to give and support them. And the treasurer just sent me a text that said, hey, we collected over $10,000 so far for Father Micah and his family. So that's great. I'm really excited to hear that. And that's only been a couple of days since we put that up. So that's really nice. Now, I was thinking about something before he did that. It's his name's day, by the way. Today is St. Andrew, I'll pull it up, of Crete, monk martyr Andrew of Crete. And so it's our treasurer's name's day today. So everybody should pray for him, because he has one of the hardest jobs in the diocese, because he has to work with me almost every day. And you notice he has no hair, right? So that's because he has to work with me. Okay, so other questions that folks would like to ask. I hear that somebody unmuted. Go ahead and ask.
I just have a question about celebrating names days. So when I came to Orthodoxy, it was like kind of like I don't know, I just had never heard of, celebrating the day that of the saint that you're named after. When did that, that tradition come up in the church, and how, and what's the proper way of celebrating your name day?
Okay, that's a good question. It's a pretty old tradition in the church. Generally, when pagans would become Orthodox, they would be given a Christian name. And from that time onward, that would be a special day for them where they would go to church, have confession and communion, and ideally have some sort of gathering to honor their saint, maybe mostly at their home. We talked about Monathos a little while ago. On Monathos, they have an interesting tradition. When it's your name's day, if you're a priest or deacon or whatever, you don't serve in the church. You serve in the kitchen. So you serve your brothers on your name's day. I really like that tradition. I think that that's a very nice tradition. And in our Russian tradition, it's kind of similar. Like, we invite people to our homes, and we celebrate the saint, and we offer a meal for everyone. The Serbs have a slightly different tradition. They did it more by tribe or by family. And so when the family or the tribe or whatever would become Orthodox, they kept their pagan names, but they were given a patron saint for the whole family or the whole tribe. And it's called a Slava. And we actually have one coming up on November 8th in our parish. We just have a couple of Serbian families, and we have one that celebrates St. Demetrius. So if you have not seen that, it's a Wednesday this year, but if you have never been present at that, it is a beautiful, beautiful service. Yeah, and when a woman marries, then she generally celebrates the slava of her husband. It kind of passes through the men, but I never met a Serbian woman who didn't kind of quietly celebrate her own slava also. So on the day I was ordained, it was St. George, and the biggest Serbian family in Jordanville had their slava that day. So I was ordained a priest, and after the meal, and we invited people to our home and so on and so forth, I went to church, and my whole family went to the slava. And it was actually, it was great. That was great. That was always a really, really fun time. But yeah, we have Slavas in our parish are the minor feast of St. George in November, and then the St. Demetrius also. Those are the two that we have. Mostly when it's St. George, it's in May. But there are a few families that celebrate at this minor feast, which is, I think, the 16th of November. I don't remember. It's something like that. So anyway, that was Milovoja's Slava, who was the founder of our parish.
That raises.
What's yours?
That raises.
Go ahead. I'm sorry, Michael.
Oh, sorry. Maybe she'll answer that. How many? How many of the Serbian Slavas are Saint George? Is it 80% or 90%? Or 99%?
It's pretty frequent. I'll just keep it at that, because I know I used to live in Serbia, and when it's St. George, you have people in the streets with like trumpets and brass bands out there celebrating and throwing flowers. It's really pretty. So it's a lot of the population.
Like a public holiday.
Pretty much.
Actually, I was in Serbia for your name's day, Michael. So for those who say that Euphemia's voice has changed quite considerably since the beginning of the program, it's because her husband is also on there with her. And I was there for Michael's name's day for the Archangel one time at the cathedral in Belgrade. That's the feast of the cathedral too. And I asked one of the priests, how many Slavas are you going to do today? And he said, well, if you notice, lots of the priests from the around the city came here after liturgy, and we will probably do several thousand. And we are used to this very specific Slava service. It's this part is done, and rejoice the martyrs, and da 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 da. when they're doing it there, like it's every 5 minutes. They just have to keep going and going and going and going. But yeah, it's a really beautiful and lovely service, and that was such a day. I will never forget how many people came with Kolach. Just hundreds and hundreds, thousands of people were on the street coming to the cathedral because that's the cathedral feast day too. So, and I remember partway through the service, I'm like, boy, this choir sounds just a little bit Russian. And after I met the choir director, and sure enough, she's from St. Petersburg. So it was just a great day. That was when right after the new patriarch had been elected, and I happened to be there then, and we got to meet with him and have lunch with him. So, okay, so I see that wait, do we have questions? No, I don't think anybody has their hand up. If you have questions, please ask. Oh well, we're 45 minutes in already, but still, we want to have everybody at least get a chance to ask one question. So I don't know if Brendan, I can tell that your daughter is busy, so she won't be asking you a question, but if you have one, feel free to ask. I'm going to look really quickly on our website and see if there's something jumping out that we should be talking about. Oh, you know what's an interesting topic? Nobody's asking. Okay. We had, Alexandra, go ahead.
Sorry, my question was just real quick about fasting on Wednesdays and Fridays. If you want to do confession, do you only fast the Wednesday and Friday and then just go to Sunday Mass and get communion and then you can do confession, or how does that work?
So I would say that in the Russian church, we are sort of the one, we sort of align confession and communion the closest. And even in Russia, it's not as close as it is abroad here. But the practice was always in the ancient world. Once the church came out of the catacombs, we're not exactly sure what it was before that. We should be honest about that. But there was definitely confession. We do know that people confessed in front of the whole church at one time. That didn't last very long because people were not too excited to tell all their sins to everybody. But the practice was that one or two confessors would be assigned to each diocese, and that was their job. They didn't have a parish. They just rode on a circuit around the whole diocese, and when they would come, everybody would go to confession. And the rest of the time, people would prepare themselves and go to communion, and if they committed a serious sin, then they would abstain from going to communion, but essentially that's how it worked. That process, that same idea was tried in Rus. This is before Russia, but in the Kievan Rus, when Christianity came and sort of took root there and was spread all over. It was just the distances were too vast, and so very early on in the experiment of Christianity in Rus, all parish priests were given a blessing to hear confessions. Well, that made it much easier for people to go to confession, right? You didn't have to wait till the priest came riding on his horse to hear everybody's confessions. You could go whenever you wanted to. And so very early on, in maybe by the year 1200, it became the practice in Russia to kind of link confession and communion pretty closely. So the practices are different in the Russian church than they are in most other churches. So in most other churches, people probably go to confession a few times a year, and maybe they might go to communion more often, or they might go to confession only and communion only those couple of times a year. But your question is more, how do you prepare for confession? And what I would say is that it's good to read something that helps you to examine your conscience. Some people like to read the 10 Commandments. Some people like to read the Beatitudes. All those things are good. I'm going to put a link in right now to our class chat of something that we've put together at our parish, which just has I put a bunch of pamphlets about confession and communion up, which are designed to help folks kind of think about their spiritual lives. And I usually suggest to people, sit down, read, take some notes for yourself, and maybe bring those notes with you when you go to confession. There's no sin in that. I myself, when I go to confession, if I don't have notes, my mind just goes blank. I'm quite aware that I'm a sinner, but the specifics are gone. So it's perfectly fine to bring a few notes with yourself. I wouldn't write out, like paragraphs, but to have some bullet points there, I think is very, very useful. So, but there's no special fasting rule for confession. It's just for communion. You should be trying to fast on Wednesdays and Fridays before you are going to communion. In some Serbian traditions, some Serbian parishes, people will fast strictly for 3 days before, and maybe even on the day of communion. You should just talk to the priest and see how he wants to do it. I've seen that. I've also seen most of my friends who are Serbian priests say it's not necessary. Just fast on Wednesdays and Fridays like you usually do. You don't have to do a special one, but just double check with your priest to make sure that you're on the same page.
So along with the communion for children, at what age do they have to start fasting so they can also get communion on Sunday?
So I always tell the parents that you know your child better than anyone. And so hypothetically, kids should begin some kind of fasting regime around the age of 7. But like I said, you know your kid better than anyone. So some kids just take to it and it's great, no problem. Other kids, they really struggle, or when they're having a growth spurt, they just can't do it. But when they're not, they're okay. So you just have to kind of experiment with your kid and see how it works. Like where you go to church on Sunday, does liturgy start at 10:30? Is the child really going to be able to fast from midnight until like noon? Maybe, maybe not. I mean, yes, that's ideally what happens. But you as a parent have to kind of figure that out and work with the priest. So some kids just can't fast that long. But in that case, they shouldn't be having like bacon and eggs. There's no reason to have such a thing. Maybe they have a little piece of bread with a few sips of water to just make their stomach stop screaming before they go to church. So we want to fast as strictly as possible, but each parent is gonna understand that best for their kid. And so we don't have a hard and fast rule. By the time you're 15, 16, 14, maybe for girls, you should have your regular fasting rule, which is about the same as other adults when you're done growing. But we want to ease the kids into that as much as possible so that they see fasting as something which is both challenging and adds value to their spiritual life. And if we try to just slam them with heavy duty fasting the day that they turn 7, that might not work out. So as in all things, this is what I say to parents, and they hate it. They're tired of hearing me say it, but it's true. It's a war. It's not a battle. We're fighting a war. We want to win the war. And sometimes you have to retreat. Sometimes you have to be willing to lose a battle in the service of winning the war. So as a parent, use your wisdom. Try to help your child to struggle spiritually, but when it's just not going to happen. And that's okay.
Thank you, Father.
You're welcome. Okay, somebody put something in the thing. I thought I had 2 questions I submitted prior. Lori, did you put them in the? Let me see if I can find them in the Curious Vlad questions. Great. I looked at that earlier and I didn't see it. I'm sorry. Okay. Hopefully you didn't want to be anonymous. I'm sorry. Oh yeah. Let's see if Yep. Okay, good. Please don't use my name. Sorry. So I won't ask that one. Let's see who else. Other people also submitted questions here.
It's okay. Use my
Okay.
name.
Sorry. I don't think that's a bad thing. There's a lot of people who have questions about that. So I think that's a totally legit question, and you should own it. The question is how to take a blessing and why. Okay, so let's see if we can do this. I'm going to adjust my screen a little bit here. Okay, so everything will probably be backwards and upside down, but this is my right hand. It probably looks like my left to you. You put your right hand on top of your left hand. Is this thing going to work? It's not. There we go. Okay, so your right hand on top of your left hand in the form of a cross. It's like a simple cross, right? Like a plus sign held sideways, right on top of left. We always in the Orthodox Church, right is always good and left is always not good. It doesn't mean the left-handed people are bad. Please don't, we won't go there. It's but right on top of left in the form of a cross, and you say either Father or Master bless, and Master is for the bishop, of course. And then the priest will hold his hands like this. Okay, this is I, C, X, C. right? Jesus Christ, ICXC, Jesus Christ. And the priest blesses you using the form of a cross with his hands like that in the name of Jesus Christ. So why you wouldn't ask a deacon for a blessing? The deacon, when he's ordained, is not given the grace to consecrate the bread and wine into the body and blood of Christ. So that's why you ask a priest for a blessing, because he has that grace which is given in the rite of ordination. A bishop, when he's consecrated, is given a double portion of grace. That's why he blesses with two hands, right? We see the bishop hold like that. The priest only blesses with his right hand. The bishop also with his left. So hypothetically, the bishop could give you a blessing with his left hand. I remember, although they usually use the right hand, I remember one of our bishops, I don't know why he did this, but at the great entrance, this is a minor point, but I always found this humorous. At the great entrance, the bishop senses the discus before the deacon gives it to him, and then he says what he's going to say, our great Lord and Father, blah blah blah, and then the priest comes with the chalice, and again he senses, and then he takes it and he says the rest of his prayer. But there was this one bishop, Bishop Alexander of Buenos Aires. He would always sense with his left hand at the great entrance, and at first I thought it's because he was hurt, but then I realized he was a priest for like 30 years, and he never got the sense with his left hand because he was a priest. So he did it at the small entrance, and I always found that or at the great entrance. I always chuckled at that when I got to serve with him, which was a couple of times. So in any case, from a bishop and a priest, you ask a blessing because they have. Oops, get rid of you. No, I didn't. Good. They have in ordination been given the grace to consecrate the bread and wine into the body and blood of Christ. But not a deacon or a reader or a subdeacon who don't have that same grace. I hope that answers the question.
No,
Okay, let me read it. Let me read it again.
no, it's okay. Because you explained this beautifully just now and last week. But what I've never understood is, what is the blessing? Is it something specific to the person? Or is it just a generic blessing that is given? That's all I wanted to ask.
Oh, sorry. Sorry, TMI.
No.
Yeah. So I guess I did talk about that last week. Sorry, I forgot. So the priest or the bishop blesses you in the name of the Lord, and that's why he holds his hand like that. Jesus Christ. He blesses you in the name of Jesus Christ. Sometimes people will come and say, could you give me a blessing because I'd like to do ABC or 1, 2, 3. Now, you don't have to ask a blessing to tie your shoes. I don't care what color refrigerator you buy. Those kind of things, it just doesn't matter. You know, like sometimes people will come and ask that, I'll just be like, okay, whatever. And other times I'll say, well, you know, you don't have to ask that, but it's you. So anyway, sometimes though, people will be like, this is a spiritual issue that I'm struggling with, and I would like to do this, and I think this will work, and I've prayed about this a lot, and would you bless me to do that? You know, I go to you for confession, so I'm asking you this blessing. And then the priest will also bless you like that. But generally, when you ask a blessing from the priest, he's blessing you in the name of the Lord, Jesus Christ, because he has this grace of the priesthood. So.
Okay, thank you. That makes
You're
a lot
welcome.
of sense. Thank you, Father.
I'm glad. Okay. Now that I opened that, I saw there was other ones. This is logistical in our parish. Maybe I can get some feedback because I'm holding the chalice, so I can't see what's going on afterwards. So because we're using 2 or 3 chalices every Sunday, thank God we have 2 or 3 priests, depending on whether Father Dimitri is serving in the mission. We started having like this major issue with people going to the bread and wine. It was just everything was clogged up. So we thought that if we moved the table a little bit away from the middle of the church, that it would reduce the sort of congestion in the middle of the church. Because by the time communion was finished, people would have communion, they'd turn around and they couldn't even move because the lines were right back to the communion chalices. So we thought, okay, we'll move it farther and put it in the corner and see what happens. But it would be great to have feedback from people if that was useful, or if we just move the problem out of the way. So it sounds like maybe we just move the problem out of the way. We have our head altar server also on the call tonight, so I'm sure he'd really like to get the feedback.
It was kind of a disaster.
Oh, disaster. That's a good word.
I'm sorry. It's like everybody crowded into the corner, and then they didn't know where to go.
Got it. So what about this? What if we had two tables? Like we let people, we kissed two crosses yesterday because there's so many people in church. Instead of making everybody wait for 10 minutes to kiss the cross, we decided we'd use two. We use two chalices because we have two priests and it makes communion go by. So it's not like 30 minutes or 40 minutes. What if we use two tables? Do people think that would work better?
I think so. Euphemia?
She's captive by the head altar server. For those who don't know, her husband, Subdeacon Michael, is the head altar server. Oh.
Sorry, honey.
Yeah, that could. We just need more space. We can try two tables.
I think we should build a new church, Michael. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that's the solution. But yeah, we can try two tables. It's just hard coordinating getting the bread out and back. But
I think we're at this part right now. Michael, correct me if I'm wrong. I think we're just trying stuff to see what works, because thank God we have this problem that, like there's just so many people. We're not quite sure what to do with everybody, but maybe next week, Michael, we can try two tables.
yeah.
Okay,
Or maybe
that's
one
good.
table with lines going on both sides of it, so that there's
Oh,
maybe
yeah.
two trays or something.
That's a good idea.
People
I've
could
seen
walk
that.
up things.
I've seen that big parishes where they have like a 6-foot table, and there's like two lines to get bread and wine. So we could try that too. I think the key is to have more than one line, no matter how we do it. So for those who aren't St. Vladimir people, sorry that we're getting into the weeds here, but yeah, thank God for this problem. We need to figure it out.
I personally think if people just are more patient in line, because sometimes, I'll just be waiting and then like people will cut in front, and like that's not a big deal, but like it just like makes it more like, or less orderly.
Yeah.
Like if people just wait and are just more like the bread's not going to disappear.
God willing. Okay, well, let's try either two lines with one big table or two tables. I'm open to either. And thank God willing, we're going to keep having that same problem of lots of people going to communion every Sunday. All right, we're about at 9 o'clock. If anyone else has questions, I'm very open to them. But I also think that there has to be an end to all good things, and an hour is probably a pretty good time to spend together on a Monday night. I'm more than happy to receive questions ahead of time. Lori used the form, which we have on our website. That goes up at noon every single Monday. So if you don't remember what the address is, doesn't matter. Just you can look at our website. It's always there, noon every Monday. And that's a good way to ask. You can ask questions if you're watching this as a video in the comments below here on YouTube. Or you can join us and raise your hand as Brendan just did.
Yes, thank you, Father. We were wondering what is the significance of the antidor exactly?
So that's a good question. The antidor, it actually means in place of communion. So practically speaking, the bread that we give, and that's the bread which is given at the cross at the very end. Practically speaking, if we really give you the antidor, which is what's left over when we cut the prosphora that becomes the body of Christ, the lamb. Okay, that in the Greek tradition, Serbs do this too. It's one big loaf, and so there's a lot of leftover, like a ton of bread left over. But in the Russian tradition, it just happened that we have 5 small loaves instead of one big one. So the amount of Antidor which is left over is not nearly enough to distribute to the people. One. Secondly, if we were going to distribute the Antidor to the real Antidor to the people, everyone would have to be fasting, like no breakfast, no coffee, just as if you were going to communion. So over the years, we've realized that's not happening. People are going to fast when they go to communion, thank God for that, but they're not going to if they're not going to communion. Plus, we don't have very much Antidor anyway. So what we do is we essentially just bless a bunch of prospera, and that's what we give at the cross. So it's blessed bread, but it's not the actual Antidor itself.
Okay, thank you. Also, if we have time, what is the significance of the bread and wine after the priest gives us communion with the spoon?
That is a strictly practical thing. It's not, it doesn't symbolize anything except that we want to make sure that after fasting for so long, that all the communion that you partake of, nothing is left in your mouth, everything is swallowed. And so by having a little bread and wine afterwards, or we have water also sometimes, not everybody takes wine, some people prefer water. That's just practically to make sure that you swallow everything.
Oh, okay, so it's not blessed in any way.
Nope, it's just a pragmatic, practical way to make sure that that happens. In fact, you'll notice that our altar servers are on the lookout in case somebody decides to skip that part. Sometimes people forget, or they haven't been to communion in a long time, or something like that, and they'll track them down and say, "No, come on back. This is not an optional part." So,
Well, we
comes from
we do use blessed wine, blessed bread, and blessed water in the wine too. Just
yes,
because.
that's true. That's true, and that seems appropriate after having Holy Communion, but it's not. There's no liturgical significance to it. This comes from a time when the church stopped giving people communion in their hands. That was quite a long time ago, but there was a time when that happened, or the people would drink from the chalice, and they would be given the body into their mouth. But there was abuses that came from that. People would sort of steal it away, or so to make sure that there was no way that could happen. The church has for centuries and centuries, probably 1,000 years, given people Holy Communion with a spoon, with the body and blood together, and then made sure that people had bread and something to drink, either wine or water, afterwards. I've actually heard that in some places they use tea, whatever. Because it doesn't matter, because the point is it's strictly practical to make sure you swallow everything. Good. Alexandra, you raised your hand. But you're on mute.
Sorry, really quickly.
Oh, it's all good.
So if you're taking medication, can you take it before church on Sunday if you were taking communion?
Depends on the situation. If it's a medication like heart medication, or if you have like terrible high blood pressure, something like that, if it's going to endanger your life not to take it, then you should take it. But if it's something that could wait till after, even if it's a little uncomfortable, then you should wait till after.
Okay. And last question is just for dress code, because we wear scarves when we go to church, but let's say the Greeks don't. Do you have maybe a flyer, pamphlet, something that, kind of gives an outline of what is appropriate attire for church, or something that's set out by the higher ups that
I do. What I'm going to ask though, because I feel like we're coming to the end, so if I put it in the class chat, you may not get it.
Okay.
Maybe you could send me an email. I'll be happy to send you back a link. I have a little flyer, like a one-pager. It's a very cute picture. It shows a little girl holding her brother's hand, but they're both dressed as they should be for church. So, yeah, I'm happy to share that.
Thank you. And also the link for the family that was in the accident, please.
Oh yeah, I'll do that. So send me a note about that, and I'll make sure to send that to you.
Thank you, Father.
Thank God. For those who weren't at church yesterday, we did a collection on our own before, and thank God we were able to send, between what we collected in church and what our sisterhood sort of topped off, This is not to brag, and I'm not putting it in writing anywhere. I'm just telling people but we were able to send 5,000, and I think that's something that we really need to thank God for, that people were so generous to help them. And it is important because Father Micah took all of his vacation time to do church services on feast days. So now family got in an accident, he has no paid time off. So any time he's taking, he's not getting paid for. So what we send is really going to help them a lot. So thank you everybody for being generous. Okay, we made it past 9 o'clock and everyone still seems to be alive, but I think that it's probably long enough. Everyone has plenty of Father Gregory in their life and you don't need too much more. So let's say a prayer and say good night, and thank you everybody for joining us. It is truly meet to bless thee, the Theotokos, ever blessed and most blameless, and Mother of our God, more honorable than the cherubim, and beyond compare more glorious than the seraphim, who without corruption gave us birth to God, the Word, the very Theotokos, thee do we magnify. Good night, everyone. Thanks so much for joining.
Thank you, Father.
Thank you so much, Father.
Good night.
Thank God.